Hello and welcome to an instructional video on dissecting owl pellets. Now first of all, you might be wondering what an owl pellet is. Basically an owl pellet isn't poo, it's actually what an owl regurgitates after it's eaten its meal. So inside this pellet here, it contains all the fur and the bones and any matter of maybe a small mammal or a bird or even amphibians can be found in owl pellets. The reason we dissect the owl pellets is because it can give us a good idea of what the owl has been eating and also how healthy the overall habitat is around it. Now you might be wondering where you can find owl pellets from, and actually finding wild owl pellets can sometimes be quite difficult because in the wild they can often break down and just disintegrate. Now there's more than one species of owl here in Britain. We have the barn owl, and we're going to be looking at some barn owl pellets here. These are actually quite large pellets, the barn owl pellets are. You can also find tawny owl pellets. They are our most common owl, but they're normally found in woodlands and can often be quite hard to find. And our smallest owl is the little owl. And little owls are quite interesting because they're often the owl that you see out in the daytime. And although you can't see that well probably on the camera, the little owl pellet has small beetle cases in it and even parts of worms encased in the outside of their pellet. So they're quite an interesting one to find as well. But again, because they're so small, they're very, very difficult to find. If you're struggling to find owl pellets, then you can always get in touch with your local bird of prey centre, and they'll often be able to maybe send you some of their captive bred pellets. But they don't always have the best material inside them. You can't really beat a wild barn owl pellet for finding decent skeletons. Now there's certain bits of equipment that you'll need for dissecting an owl pellet. Now don't worry, you don't have to rush out and buy a whole load of gear, and in fact you can get away with just using a white piece of paper like this and some cocktail sticks. But there are some other bits which are really, really handy. Now first of all, tweezers. These are really, really useful things to have, especially when you're trying to tease little bones out from amongst the pellet. Tweezers come in all different shapes and sizes. These are just cheap plastic ones that are available from any sort of craft store really. Also, what's really handy is a magnifying lens. Now this is just a really cheap one that you can go and buy from any store really, like Poundland, places like that. Fantastic for being able to look at the smaller bones because as you'll see there's some really, really small bones. I mentioned cocktail sticks, but you can get little small pokers and prodders, and this is a very, very handy bit of equipment just as you're trying to prise things open, especially when you're using your tweezers. Now don't worry if you don't want to get your hands dirty, because some people don't like it, but what you can actually do is you can also use water to help you break down the owl pellet. The only problem is it does tend to get a little bit messy, so if you're going to use water, I recommend you maybe get a plastic tray just to try and keep it in one place. Another really important piece of equipment which might help you out with your owl pellet dissection is a chart like this. Now the bone chart is readily available off the internet, there's all different types available, but you'll see the one that I've got here actually shows you all the different bones from the individual animals that you might potentially find in your owl pellet. Now comes the really exciting part where you actually get to dissect the owl pellet. So you've got all your tools ready, you know what you're doing, so you can get hold of your tweezers and your prodder and you can actually start teasing open the owl pellet. Now what I tend to do, especially with the barn owl pellet, is break it in half first, and then with your tweezers you can gently start to pull out the parts of the bones and the animal that's in there. And what I actually often do is I will actually take the bones and I will pull the pellets apart first of all and sort through the bones later on. And then with my bone chart, I can actually have a look at the individual bones and try and work out what animals we've managed to find inside our owl pellet. So you've finished dissecting all your owl pellet and you've actually managed to then sort through your bones. And what I actually do is I get a separate white piece of paper and I draw circles. About 5 circles is probably all you'll actually need, and then you can sort through, pick through the bones and put them into individual little sections. Now if we have a quick look at the bones that I've got here in front of me, these are all from a barn owl pellet, just like the one here in front of me. And you'll see here we've got some really, really fine bones here. These are actually the rib bones from a small mammal, a vole or a mouse, and you can see they're very delicate, really, really difficult to try and pick out in one piece. And then at the back here, we've got some much bigger, thicker bones. These are actually the leg bones from the mammal. And then these very, very flat ones are actually the shoulder blades. And if you touch your shoulder blade now, you can actually see it's very, very similar really to what we have as humans. We've got some hip bones here with part of the leg bone on it, and then probably the bone that interests most people is this one here, and this is the skull. And you can actually tell pretty much what sort of species of mammal it might be, and we can see here that this is a very, very short muzzle. It's got a very blunt end on it, and that tells me that it's probably a short-tailed field vole, which is about right for a barn owl because that is their favourite food. Some bones that might catch you out whilst you're doing it are little flat ones like this, and that's actually the back of the skull. Okay, because what owls will do when they catch their prey is they will often bite the back of their skull in order to kill it. So you often get little fragments like this which break off when it's being digested. You'll also find teeth bones. You might confuse that for a rib bone, but that is actually a whole tooth that has fallen out from the lower mandible. Very long, but you can see it's got a bit of a different colour to it. It's a bit thicker. And here you see that's exactly the lower jaw piece, and that long tooth actually came out of that part there. Now some of the smallest bones you will have to pick out are these ones here. Very, very difficult and tricky, but there's normally quite a lot of them in a pellet, and this is actually the vertebra from a small mammal. So these would be pieced together inside the mouth, but obviously as it's digested they break down and fall apart. But what I managed to find within this pellet was actually this, and that is part of the rodent's tail there, and the vertebrae are actually still attached to each other as the owl has regurgitated it back up in a pellet. And so with your bone chart, you can actually go through all these different bones, put them into their different sections, and you can hopefully work out whether it's a mouse, a vole, a shrew. You can also find birds' skulls in there, and moles as well, and even stuff as unusual as amphibians as well. Now, that information is really important, and it's well worth recording it. Even if you have a guess, you might only be able to work out 1 or 2 species of vole in there, maybe a shrew or a bird, but there are organisations out there like the Mammal Society and even local barn owl groups who would be really, really interested to know what's inside your pellet. Now, there's one other thing that you might actually find inside your owl pellet which I haven't told you about. You'll notice here on this white piece of paper, I've got an owl pellet which is completely disintegrated. I didn't pick this pellet apart at all. I actually left it, and over time it has broken down. Now, there's something inside this owl pellet which has actually broken it down. And as you dissect, say, a barn owl pellet, you can often find little maggots inside them. Now, don't be freaked out by these little maggots, because those little maggots are actually the larvae of what we call clothes moths, and the moths often find their way inside an owl nest box, and they will lay their eggs inside owl pellets because the fur and the bits and pieces that make up an owl pellet are a fantastic first meal for their larvae. Now, it might sound a little bit disgusting, but that's nature for you. And so if you see in your owl pellet these small maggots or larvae, don't be alarmed. They're part of nature, and just pick them out and put them for one side. But whatever you do, make sure you tidy up when you're finished.